The fluorescent light above the HR desk flickered twice, then held. Wren noticed things like that now. Small failures. The kind nobody fixed until they became catastrophic. She was holding a cardboard box that smelled like old coffee and rubber cement, which was fitting, because her entire career at Halverson and Briggs had smelled exactly like that for 6 years. The contents: one ceramic mug with a chip on the rim, a dead succulent she'd named Gerald, and a framed photo she wasn't sure she wanted anymore. The photo was the problem. Not because of her. She looked fine in it, tired, but fine, the way she always looked. It was Theo, standing next to her at the Halverson holiday party 11 months ago, his arm around her shoulders, grinning at the camera like a man who had never done anything wrong in his life. She should have known. She should have known because Theo's grin never quite reached his eyes, and because whenever she mentioned rent, he looked at the ceiling, and because 3 weeks ago, Cressida from payroll had pulled her aside in the elevator and said, "I thought you should know," with the particular tone of someone who had been sitting on information too long. Theo had been sleeping with Wren's direct supervisor. Not just sleeping with her. He'd told Miriam, the supervisor, that Wren had been falsifying invoices, which Wren had not been doing, which was not the point. The point was that Miriam had the power to make that accusation land, and Theo had handed her the ammunition, and neither of them had the decency to look Wren in the eye when security walked her out. Miriam had watched from the glass wall of her office. Theo had not shown up at all. So now Wren was standing on the sidewalk outside Halverson and Briggs with a dead succulent and a photograph of a man she'd spent 3 years cooking for. And the fluorescent light inside the lobby was still flickering, and she thought, "I am 31 years old, and I own nothing that matters." The walk to the parking garage took 4 minutes. The drive to the exit took 2. She sat at the gate for an additional 45 seconds, because she couldn't remember whether she'd turned left or right out of the garage, even though she'd made this commute every single day for 6 years. She turned left. She drove for a while without knowing where she was going. This was fine. She was very good at operating on autopilot. She'd been doing it for most of her adult life. Head down. Work harder. Trust the numbers. Trust the system. Trust the people who said they were on your side. She had a natural aptitude for bookkeeping. Her mother had told her this was a stable path. Her mother had been wrong about most things, but she'd been right about Wren and numbers. Numbers made sense. Numbers did not smile at you in photographs while quietly dismantling your life. She ended up at a bar called Harker's, which she'd never been to, and which she chose specifically because she had never been to it. She didn't want to run into anyone who would ask how she was doing. She wanted a drink and a booth in the back, and approximately no human interaction. Harker's was upscale in the way that places try to look upscale when they want to attract a certain kind of money. Dark wood, low lighting, bartenders in black, who did not make eye contact unless you made it first. It was a Tuesday evening. The place was maybe a third full. Nobody looked at Wren when she came in, which was exactly what she needed. She ordered a whiskey sour. Then she sat down in the last booth, put the cardboard box on the seat beside her, and stared at the table. The photo was still in the box. She took it out, looked at Theo's face for about 3 seconds, and turned it face down on the table. She was on her second drink when the man sat down across from her, not beside her. Across, directly, as if they had a reservation. Wren looked up. He was not the kind of man you failed to notice. He was perhaps 40, perhaps older, with the kind of face that had been through things and wasn't bothered about it. A jaw that had been broken at least once, if she was reading the set of it correctly. A scar that ran from just below his left ear to the collar of a suit jacket that cost more than her monthly rent had been. His hands, folded on the table in front of him, were not the hands of someone who spent his days in conference rooms. He looked at her like she was an entry in a ledger he was deciding whether to balance. "You're in my booth," he said. Wren looked around. The bar was a third full. There were at least 8 other empty booths. "There's a sign," she said. "There doesn't need to be." She considered this. Any reasonable person would have gathered their cardboard box and moved. Wren had been reasonable for 31 years, and look where that had gotten her. "I got here first," she said, That's how booths work. Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't quite amusement. It was closer to the look you'd give a chess piece that moved somewhere unexpected. He didn't leave. He didn't argue either. He sat back, not relaxed exactly, but contained, in the way of someone who had learned to take up exactly the space he intended and no more, and signaled the bartender with 2 fingers. The bartender brought 2 drinks without being told what. He pushed one across the table to Wren. "I didn't order that," she said. "Consider it an apology for my booth." She looked at the drink. It was the same thing she'd been drinking. Whiskey sour, no cherry. She hadn't ordered the cherry either time. "You were watching what I was drinking," she said. "I notice things." He picked up his own glass. "It's a professional habit. What's your profession?" He looked at her for a moment. Asset management. Wren had run the books for enough companies to know when someone was using the vaguest possible accurate description of their work. She picked up the drink he'd sent over. "What's in the box?" he asked. 6 years. He glanced at the cardboard box, then back at her. He didn't offer condolences. She appreciated that. The photos face down, he said. "Yes, person or job? Both," she said. "Same situation, technically." He didn't press. She wasn't sure why she kept talking. "My boyfriend told my boss I was committing fraud," she said, "to protect himself, or her. I'm not totally clear on the geometry of it, honestly. The math doesn't quite add up, and I've been doing this in my head for 3 weeks. He was quiet for a moment. "Was he right?" he said. "About the fraud?" Wren looked at him. "No, but you're good with numbers. I'm excellent with numbers. So you would have hidden it better." She laughed before she meant to. It wasn't a happy laugh, but it was real, and it had been a while since anything had been real. "Yes," she said. "I absolutely would have." His name, it turned out, was Callum Voss. She didn't get it right away. It came out sideways over the 3rd drink, the way names sometimes do, dropped into a sentence about something else, almost accidental. She caught it and didn't say anything. She filed it. Later, she would understand why she hadn't recognized it immediately. She'd been in corporate accounting, not in the particular circles where Voss's name carried weight. She would understand, later, that this was probably the only reason he'd talked to her for so long, that she was the only person in that bar who wasn't performing something for him because she hadn't known there was a performance to give. He asked her at some point why she'd sat in his booth specifically. "I didn't know it was yours," she said, "but all the others were empty. This one was in the back. I wanted the wall behind me." He looked at her. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because I've had a bad week and I didn't want anyone behind me." He nodded once, like she'd given a satisfactory answer to a question he didn't ask out loud, and then he said, "I have a job." Wren waited. "Not an offer," he said. "A statement. I have a job, and the person doing it is no longer reliable, and reliable is the only thing I actually require." "What's the job?" "Keeping my books." She set down her glass. "You just watched me get fired for alleged bookkeeping fraud. I watched you explain, with some specificity, that you were framed and that you would have done it better if you had actually done it." He said it without inflection. "Those are 2 different data points, and they both read in your favor." "You don't know me." "I know you haven't moved that photograph since you put it face down. I know you've had 2.5 drinks, and you're still running math on something in your head. I know you didn't leave this booth when I told you to, which means either you have very good instincts about which fights to pick or you've never heard my name before." Wren said nothing. "The latter," he said. "I know." She looked at the cardboard box. Dead succulent, chipped mug. Face-down photo of a man who had handed her career to a woman she'd never done anything to. "I'd need to see the books first," she said. "Obviously. And I'd need to understand the full scope of what I'd be keeping records of. That will take more than one conversation." "I'm not agreeing to anything," she said. "I'm not asking you to." He left before she did, which she hadn't expected. He put a card on the table. Plain, matte, just a phone number and an initial, and walked out through the back of the bar without looking at anyone. She noticed that the people he passed didn't look at him either, the way you don't look directly at a light source, if you know it will burn. She sat there for another 20 minutes. She paid her tab. She tipped well because she always tipped well. She put the card in her jacket pocket. She left the photograph on the table. She called the number 4 days later, not because she'd decided anything, because she'd spent 4 days running calculations on her situation. The severance would run out in 3 months. The fraud allegation would follow her to any firm that ran a standard background check, and Theo had blocked her on every platform before she'd even gotten home that night, which told her everything she needed to know about how much of the situation he'd anticipated. The number rang twice. A man answered who was not Voss. "Wren Alcott?" the man said. She hadn't given her last name at the bar. "Yes, Mr. Voss is available tomorrow at 10. The address will be texted to this number." The address was a building in the financial district she'd walked past 100 times without noticing. Not because it was nondescript, but because it was the kind of building your eye skipped over, the way you don't study walls. 12 floors, clean glass, a lobby with no signage that she could identify. The man at the front desk, not a receptionist, she noted, though he was sitting at a reception desk, walked her to an elevator without asking for ID. The elevator went to the 10th floor. The doors opened into a room that looked, for all the world, like a very high-end accounting firm. She'd been inside enough of them to know. The paper weight, the particular silence of people who worked with numbers. The monitors positioned at angles that prevented casual viewing. The document shredder in the corner that was clearly commercial grade. Voss was standing at the window when she came in. He looked the same as he had in the bar. She wasn't sure what she'd expected, that the daylight would reveal something different about him, soften the angles of his face, make him look more like a person and less like a decision. It didn't. If anything, the morning light made the scar more visible, and the stillness of him more pronounced. He stood like someone who had never in his life been in a hurry because he'd never needed to be. "You didn't come yesterday," he said. "I said I'd think about it. You did." He turned from the window. "What were you thinking about? Whether the accounting irregularities in your industries are structurally similar to what I know, or whether I'd be learning a new system entirely." He almost smiled. "And? Similar enough that the learning curve is manageable. Different enough that I'd need 90 days before I could give you a reliable read on anything." 60, he said. 75. He looked at her for a moment. 75, she sat down. He sat across from her. Not behind a desk, she noticed. Across from her, the same way he'd sat in the booth. She filed that, too. He told her what the job was. Not all of it, she understood that, but enough that she could map the shape of it. Revenue streams that moved through legitimate businesses like water through a filtration system, emerging on the other side as clean and auditable as anything. Accounts distributed across entities that were individually entirely unremarkable. The volume was considerable. The current state of the records was, he said, a disaster. "Why?" she asked. "My previous bookkeeper developed a loyalty conflict." "With you?" "With another organization." She understood what he was not saying. "Is the previous bookkeeper going to be a problem for me?" "No," he said, in a tone that did not invite follow-up questions. She didn't ask any. What he was offering was compensation she hadn't made at Halverson in 2 years combined, a level of discretion that would keep her name clean in every way that mattered, and no interference in how she structured the work. What he was asking for was accuracy, consistency, and the particular kind of silence that people in her position needed to understand before they accepted it. "I don't do loyalty conflicts," she said. "I know. You don't know me. You tipped 22% on a whiskey sour when you'd just lost your job," he said. "That tells me something." She had not thought he'd noticed that. "What does it tell you? That you do what you think is right even when no one's watching. That's a rarer quality than people understand." She looked at her hands. She thought about Theo's grin in the photograph. She thought about the fluorescent light flickering in the lobby at Halverson and Briggs, a small failure nobody had bothered to fix. "Okay," she said. He didn't smile. He didn't reach across to shake her hand. He picked up his phone, said 2 words to someone on the other end, and set it down. "You'll start reviewing the current state of the books today," he said. "Tell me what you find." She found a lot. Not fraud, or not exactly. More like archaeological layers of decisions made by someone who understood the structure but not the implications, or who understood the implications and had been selectively ignoring them. There were revenue streams coded in ways that flagged under even a cursory review. There were shell accounts that were perfectly legal but stacked in a configuration that would draw exactly the wrong kind of attention if anyone looked at the aggregate picture. She worked for 7 days straight before she put together a summary. She put it on Voss's desk at 8 in the morning. He read it without expression. "You found all of this in a week," he said. "I found the obvious parts in a week. The less obvious parts are going to take another month. How bad is it? Not catastrophic, but it will be if it sits another 6 months." She paused. "Whoever did this before me was either incompetent or they were building something." He set the papers down. "Building what? A case. The structure is too consistent for incompetence. These entries don't add up wrong at random. They add up wrong in specific ways that would look like someone else's signature if anyone came looking." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're saying they were building an exit strategy. I'm saying someone was building something that would not go well for you if it were examined by the right people," she said. Yes, she'd expected this to be a tense conversation. She'd been prepared for it. What she hadn't been prepared for was the way Voss looked at her when she finished. Not with anger, but with something quieter and more careful, like recalculation. "Fix it," he said. "I'll need access to all the linked entities. You'll have it. I'll need the organizational map for how these accounts connect. My associate will give it to you. And I need to know," she said, "that if I find other things that predate the bookkeeper, you want to know about those too, even if it's inconvenient." He looked at her for a long moment. "Especially then," he said. The weeks that followed had a particular quality she couldn't quite name at first. Structure, that was the word for it. Not safety, exactly, but the particular steadiness of a system that functioned the way it was supposed to. Voss's operation. She'd stopped letting herself think too hard about what that operation was, because she understood her piece of it and did her piece of it well, and this was what she'd always been good at, ran on precision. People showed up when they were supposed to. Numbers moved when they were supposed to. Nobody wasted her time. Nobody wasted Voss's time either, which was something she observed with a kind of detached interest. He was not warm. He was not unkind. He was precise in the way of someone who had learned, probably the hard way, that imprecision cost more than it was worth. He asked questions that went directly to the point. He didn't explain himself unless he decided explanation was useful. He treated her work like what it was, essential, and hers. She had not had that at Halverson, she realized. Her work had been essential there too, but it had not been hers. It had been something that moved through her into the machine and came out the other side belonging to the machine. Here, when she put a report on Voss's desk, he read it like it mattered who had written it. It was a strange thing to notice, and she noticed it anyway. 6 weeks in, she found the rest of it. The buried accounts were older than the current bookkeeper's tenure, older by almost 3 years. Someone before the last person had started something that the last person had either not found or chosen not to disturb. It was subtle, and it was patient, and it was the kind of thing that Wren only caught because she had a specific habit of running lateral checks that most bookkeepers didn't bother with. She put it together in a single night. She sat in the office until 2 in the morning, with the organizational map spread out across 3 monitors, and when she finally had the full picture, she sat very still for a long moment. Then she called the number that was not Voss's number, and she said, "I need to see him in the morning." He was there at 7. She hadn't gone home. She walked him through it, all of it. The original accounts, the structure, who it pointed to, not with certainty, but with the particular directional clarity of a financial trail laid down by someone who'd been careful but not careful enough. When she finished, she said, "This came from inside, before my predecessor, possibly concurrent with someone still active." Voss was standing at the window again. He'd listened without interrupting, which she was starting to understand was how he listened to things that mattered. "You've been here 6 weeks," he said. 7, as of yesterday. "And you found this." "I found it because it's my job to find it," she said, "and because I'm good at my job, and because nobody told me where not to look." He turned from the window. "Most people," he said slowly, "would have found this and buried it, or found this and taken it somewhere else." "I know. Why didn't you?" She thought about it. She'd thought about it most of the night, actually, which was why she hadn't gone home. "Because you hired me to tell you the truth about your books," she said. "Not the comfortable version, the actual version. That's the job, even if the truth is dangerous." "The truth is usually dangerous," she said. "That's why people pay good money to keep accurate records. If it weren't dangerous, you could just guess." He looked at her for a long time. That recalculating look again. She was getting better at reading it. The slight shift in how he held himself when he was revising an assessment downward, and the slightly different shift when he was revising it up. This was upward. "There's going to be a response to this," he said, "when I act on it. I figured it may complicate your position here." "My position here was already complicated," she said. "I knew that when I took the job, and yet, she agreed. He nodded once. Not a thank you. She didn't think Voss operated in thank yous, but a nod that meant received, filed, weighted correctly. "Go home," he said. "Sleep. Come back tomorrow. The accounts will still be there tomorrow. You've done what needed doing." She picked up her coat. At the door, she stopped. "Voss." He looked at her. "When this settles," she said, "I want to restructure the whole organizational map. The current architecture is functional, but it's inefficient, and it's got 3 other vulnerabilities that aren't active problems yet, but will be." He said nothing for a moment. "When this settles," he said, "I'll have a proposal ready." She left. In the elevator, going down, she realized her hands weren't shaking. She'd expected them to shake. She'd just handed a man who ran the kind of operation her mother had warned her about. In the general, suburban, don't ask questions sense of warned. Information that would cause significant and possibly violent consequences for someone who hadn't expected to be found. Her hands were steady. She was furious, actually. Not at Voss. At the situation she'd been handed 6 weeks ago, and 2 months before that, and 3 years before that when she'd trusted Theo's particular brand of grin. She was furious at a world that had consistently given her instincts and then consistently punished her for using them. She was done letting it. The response Voss had mentioned came 9 days later. She was not directly in it. She was not, he had made clear, the kind of asset you put in the direct line of anything, but she was close enough to hear it, to understand the shape of it, to sit in the back office with 3 monitors and the organizational map and watch numbers that had been weaponized against Voss begin systematically to resolve. The man who had set it up had been, it turned out, meticulous. He'd counted on no one looking at the 3rd layer. He'd been right about most of the people in Voss's orbit. He hadn't counted on Wren. She found out who he was on a Tuesday morning the way she found out most things, by running a cross-reference that nobody had asked her to run, noticing that a pattern she'd dismissed as noise was actually signal. She wrote it down. She put it on Voss's desk at noon. He read it in front of her this time. When he finished, he set the paper down. He looked at the scar on his own hand. She'd noticed him do that sometimes when he was making a decision, and then he looked at her. "This took you 4 hours, he said. 3.5? How? I recognized the signature, she said. I'd seen it in the 2nd layer. Once you know what someone's handwriting looks like, you start to see it everywhere. He was quiet for a long time. "What do you want?" he said. She blinked. "What?" "Most people who bring me something like this want something in return. Not stated." "Understood. I want my job to mean something," she said. "That's it. I want to do accurate work and have it matter. I've been doing accurate work my whole career and watching other people decide whether it mattered." She paused. "That's what I want. For it to matter." Voss looked at her. The same look she'd gotten across a bar booth on a Tuesday evening when she'd refused to give up a seat she'd taken fair and square. "It matters," he said, quietly. Like a line item entered in a ledger permanent. She nodded. She started to stand. "Wren." She stopped. "The proposal," he said. "For the restructure. How long do you need? She thought about it. Maybe less take 2 weeks. Do it right. She looked at him. He'd gone back to the paper on his desk, or appeared to, which was different, and she understood that this was how he closed a conversation when he'd said what he meant to say. She left the office. She walked down the hall to her own space, sat down at her desk, opened the organizational map on her center monitor. She had 2 weeks and a full picture of the architecture and a problem she actually understood, and finally, for the first time in years, the particular quiet satisfaction of a ledger that was going to balance. She started with the 3rd layer. She started at the beginning, the way she always did, and she did not rush, and she did not hide anything, and the numbers did not lie to her, and for once in her life that was exactly enough.